megawatt, which is roughly 30% addition. And I don't think there are any signs of, and these transmission capacities take 4, 5, 6 years to mature. Any signs of that transmission capacity coming in? So the challenge is, how do we make this power available? How do we make this power available to the vast population that we have? The further challenge, Harry and the people over here have talked about stressed assets. The fact is that the greater stress is going to come on the 15,000 megawatts of renewables that were signed up at rates of 16, 7, 15, 5 and 10 rupees per kilowatt hour. And that itself is going to lead to a huge stress on the system. So my sense is that we try to get away by talking in bits and pieces without realizing the larger stress, and the larger stress is of the Indian power sector as a whole. The distribution sector certainly is challenged, but private companies in Delhi, Mumbai, Kolkata, Ahmedabad, and a few government companies have shown that they have within themselves the capacity, the capability, and the operational wherewithal to emerge as front leaders in terms of all these parameters, and to create a situation that provides unfettered 24/7 electricity to its consumers. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. Before I discuss the subject given to us by Mr. Raja, I would like to draw your attention to one reform process that is undertaken by virtue of Electricity Act 2003. Trifurcation of earlier electricity boards. Because of the provision in the Electricity Act, all electricity boards have been trifurcated into transmission, distribution and generation. All these three companies are government-owned companies. If whether it was the intention in the Act to trifurcate three wings of power of only government-owned boards, what happened to the private utility which are still operating under one head for generation, transmission and distribution? Whether there is not any conflict of interest between those three wings of a private company, and how come there was a conflict of interest, or the efficiencies were not being achieved at that point of time, so that the government electricity boards have been trifurcated to GTD. There are various issues in that. Transmission company cannot have a trading license. How come a private utility having three different wings have a trading license, while it is having a transmission wing under its own head? So, while going ahead with the reform process, a holistic approach needs to be taken, whether we are really will really reach the destination by this reform process. Leaving that aside, the current subject is content wire and content business separation. What prompted the authority to draft this legislation? What were the necessities? No statement of reasons has been floated out. So that we will come to know the intention behind putting this draft. In the words of Mr. Harry Hall, importing some ideas, copying it and pasting it without bothering for the ecosystem of our country. Whether the condition is ripe enough, whether we are matured enough to implement that particular idea. Forget about implementation. What has really happened in those countries where such ideas have been implemented? So all these ifs and buts needs to be weighed properly, thought properly, and some draft legislations have to be proposed. Parliamentary Committee, Standing Committee on Power visited Pune. I was also there before the Standing Committee, being a member of the Regulatory Commission. We oppose this amendment tooth and nail. Oppose in the sense, we have brought out n number of points, how to address these. Then somehow, I don't know, but I was given to understand that because of the serious objection raised by the Commission of Maharashtra, this was postponed. And if I am not wrong, more or less, those were the objections of the other commissions as well as utility also. So to what extent copying and pasting it in our environment where the ecosystem does not support, where this will lead us to? I still strongly oppose this legislation. I oppose then, I oppose right now also. What will happen? Taking example of Maharashtra per se, Maharashtra Electricity Distribution Company as a whole is the owner of wire and supply. It will get itself bifurcated, trifurcated into 3 or 4 supply licenses or even 1 supply licensee or 2 supply licensees. Similarly for Reliance, Tata and Best also. I don't know what will the future for Best, I don't know, because that is a local body again. I don't know much about that aspect of the law. What will happen to the Best? Whether they will really be able to bifurcate between wire and supply. Anyway, even if it is allowed. So these companies will be a supply licensee as well as जो कुछ भी हो घर में हुआ. MECDCL will be bifurcated into MECDCL wire, MECDCL supply, and all PPA will be assigned to supply licensees. What are the contractual obligations? What are the contractual reflections in the event of breach of any PPA? And to what extent it will affect the wire licensee? That also needs to be studied and understood in proper perspective. I am not the authority to comment on that particular aspect. Mr. Sanjay Sen is not here. Probably he is the right man to comment. So assuming that the entire contractual liability will be taken over by the supply licensee, then again there is subset of incumbent distribution, incumbent supply licensee. Why this half-baked cake? Why somebody should take that liability in perpetuity for all time to come in future? Then, if you are proposing this particular amendment, then what is the need for the provision for open access in the Act? They are not touch anything about the open access. That is still there in the Act. So, whether this particular segment is akin to open access or it is in lieu of open access, Whether the all parameters that are applicable to OpenSS will be applicable to this, I am not sure. So these are the areas where clear-cut thought process needs to be chalked out and made known upfront. Because once it is legislated, it is very difficult for licensees to implement and nobody solves the problem. आप अपना मैनेज करो, क्या है करो भाई. Nobody solves the problem. So before this amendment takes place, all these questions needs to be raised by the appropriate forum and needs to be listened to by the authority that decides it. Then what between the supply licenses there is no provision for settlement mechanism. So whether there will be sub SLDCs at the supply licensing level or at the state level, main SLDC authorized to take care of grid per se and this supply licensing business and then taking care of the settlement. Then another important thing that legislation has not touched upon is what supply licensee will get, whether there is some premium. I am buying power, suppose total basket power is 4 rupees per unit, I am supplying it to consumer. Whether regulator will put something addition to 4 rupees, how that will take shape of into unknown domain. So unless all these aspects are properly thought of, reforms, it will not give the expected results. And whether it is really necessary, who will benefit this? Who will benefit this? And again, yesterday only, somebody was talking about uncertainty. There is a uncertainty in each and every small pocket of power sector. Today also Mr. Raja said that government policies should have certain duration during which you should not change it. Because there is no clear-cut message that is given to the investors, stakeholders. Same thing happened for IPPs, and so there are standard assets. So all these issues needs to be tackled in proper perspective, and then only we should go ahead with this legislation, if at all government has decided to go ahead with it. Thank you.
Mr. Raja, please. Thank you.
You see, we followed as a nation a socialist model after independence till 1991. 1991 came the balance of payments crisis, and there was a paradigm shift, which means introducing competition was one of them. And idea was go away from administered pricing to market determined pricing. And in economics, this has been a debate for a long time. That is, even during the heydays of socialist policy making, there was a book written by an Indian economist called Deepak Lal called the poverty of development economics. And the main point he says is, get your prices right, and then you will have everything right. In the same book, he introduces a concept which he calls as the dirigist dogma. The dirigist dogma is people in power, maybe ministers, maybe senior bureaucrats, maybe people in the Planning Commission or now Niti Aayog, certainly experts, professionals in their own way, but they discuss, debate, and then tell the country, we know what is right for you. This is what Deepak Lal calls as the dirigist dogma. And he talks about the dangers of the dirigist dogma. So, amongst the ideological positions in economics, there are many, because economics is a subject which is very, very deeply related to politics. Economics is not a subject like physics, where there is a consensus. You can create as many schools of economic thought depending on your political view. Political view means how you really want society to be organized. So at one extreme, you have complete state control, the command economy. And that kind of an economy will normally lead to communism or Marxism in politics. Then you have this so-called mixed economy or a cost of production theory of value, the cost plus, what Section 62 of the Electricity Act tries to do. Everywhere try to work out a cost plus. And that kind of economics leads to socialism in politics. While a third theory of value, the subjective preference theory of value, is where the consumer is the king. Now, India post-1991 consciously decided that we will move away from the cost of production theory of value to the subjective preference theory of value. The so-called converting savings in the economy to investment, which till 1991 was being done by the Government of India on the advice of the Planning Commission. Post 1991, the idea was to reduce the role of the Planning Commission gradually and let capital markets take the job of acting as the intermediation between savings and investment in the economy. Now, highest policy making in the government is generally done by economists or people who are stronger on the economic side. So the Electricity Act 2003 was a continuation of the economic reforms which the nation commenced in 1991. It was extremely well debated. As Mr. Dole himself said, the first draft was made sometime in 2001. Then there was a parliamentary committee under Santosh Mohan Dev. They visited all the states, had a large number of discussions. So there is, nobody can say that the Electricity Act 2003 came without too much consultation. There was a lot of consultations with all the states, with various stakeholders. I myself attended 2 of those consultations, one in Bombay and one in Hyderabad. Then finally came the 2003 Act. The intention of the 2003 Act was to go away, to introduce competition, encourage private investments, and let markets determine prices over a period of time. So for that, markets had to be created. 2 kinds of markets are envisaged in this. A wholesale market. In the wholesale market, the supply side is all the generating companies, conventional, renewable, and traders. The demand side of the wholesale market will be discoms. Discoms, and as somebody mentioned, 92% distribution is to state discoms, and there are about a few private companies distributing. That's the demand side of the wholesale market. To some extent, it did develop. That is, if we see what has happened in the last 15 years, private generation has gone up to 40% from something which was less than 5%. So wholesale market, I won't say totally developed, but remnants of the wholesale market did develop. The exchanges came up. And competitive bidding under 63, which was discussed a lot, was supposed to give a fillip to this. When sometime in 2011 they said after this date, all purchases must be only through 63, section 63. That was to really give a fillip to competition in the wholesale market. A lot of private companies put up the plants, importing the GTD package and everything else from China because it was good, cost consciousness. The area required for a thermal power plant also got reduced. And some private sector companies did it really well. Requirement of water was brought down. Requirement of land was brought down. Source the sub-assemblies from the cheapest sources. All that was good. And 63, had it gone through, would have really given a further fillip. What went wrong? What went wrong was coal. From about 2011 or so broadly, even though Coal India was signing MOUs, they were not converting MOUs to FSAs, to fuel supply agreements. Even then, during the previous government, one Mr. Pulok Chatterjee used to be in the Prime Minister's office. He was the link between Sonia Gandhi and Manmohan Singh as Joint Secretary in the PMO. And he was asked to look into it. And even a presidential directive was issued to Coal India. No, you have to fulfill your obligation. But after the directive, when the directive was discussed in the Coal India board, there was literally rebellion in the board. They made a simple point, okay, no problem, but we can fulfill this only if we import coal. And for the imported coal, obviously the higher price must be paid. Whatever was the FSA previously signed, under which at least 80% of that amount quantity has to be given, Coal India was not able to give it. And then various attempts were made how to resolve this. It couldn't be resolved. One was pooling all the prices, which the state governments opposed. Because the state GENCOs will have to pay a higher price. So coal was the fact that new capacity in power came up fast, and coal was not able to keep pace with the increased capacity addition that was taking place. It is this which actually killed 63. And people went back to 62. In 2011, even in the ministry, there were discussions that 62 should be deleted from the Electricity Act. But within 1 year, the entire situation changed completely because of coal shortage. Okay, yeah.
I fail to understand one thing. You very well said, Santosh Moondev committee went round and all that, I agree. But let's not forget three things. One, when 2003 Act came in, our ministry was headed by a technocrat. A. When you went for amendment to that, nobody from power side, I'm not holding brief on anybody's behalf, please note, opened his mouth that coal being a regulated material, major input to the power sector, and you are deregulating the downstream activities. without looking at availability of coal in a free market, number two. Number three, Coal India board or whatever the directive was given, in 2007, they had coal distribution policy came in. For that matter, I would even go a step further. Every committee in coal ministry where discussions are, they take place about either a new introduction, even when I mentioned knee-jerk decision, those also taken in consultation with CEA, Planning Commission then, Niti Aayog, now I don't know what is the position now, and Power Ministry. You see, every committee, whether it's cleaning committee, committee or what is called that SLC, long-term, short-term, Power Ministry's man is always there, always. Nobody ever opened their mouth, even when Rajgopal was writing first letter to Secretary Power to states that we are opening the generation. I was at that time director in coal. I said, sir, can I interrupt? He says, yes. I said, how you can open generation without looking at the upstream, rather downstream, this distribution and transmission? No, that we will take care of ourselves. The states are there, they will handle it. So what I say, all these decision taking, we do blame the government, no doubt. But decision making process goes through hands of all, and we all of us, including myself, after leaving the chairs, all innovative ideas come to our mind. Then we start criticizing. When we had either a regulatory body or a ministry or even in planning commission, everywhere we don't open our mouth. Why?
I think I'll try to respond, not answer, respond. The planning process in the Government of India, used to start with an approach paper which used to be prepared before every 5-year plan by the Planning Commission. The approach paper then had 3 stages. The first is to set a national target for growth in terms of GDP. There was a broad consensus amongst economists that if India has to come out of the vicious cycle of poverty, it needs minimum 8% annual rate of growth of GDP on a sustained basis. Now that is the starting point. Then it was found that there is a very strong correlation between GDP growth and commercial energy growth. And in those days, the elasticity of that used to be about 1.1. 1.1. So if you want 8% rate of growth of GDP, you require, multiplied by 1.1, about 9% rate of growth of commercial energy. So it is true that in the planning process, coal was considered as a derived demand. It was GDP which was number one. To achieve the GDP, commercial energy, and coal came by way of derived demand. And this was not the first time it was occurring. Coal production in India rose very slowly from 1950 to 1974. It was when Government of India decided to directly get into generation and NTPC was set up that suddenly, so the first situation when capacity addition and generation increased was when NTPC was set up and the Government of India decided to directly get into generation. Before that, it was all by the SCBs only. So then the pressure, at that time also, the pressure was on the coal ministry. And that is when, in a big way, open cast mining commenced. Because open cast mining was easier to do. It has other negative impacts in terms of you require so much more of land, both for the overburden and for various things. So the requirement of land in open cast mining will be location specific, but roughly about 10 times more than what is required in underground mining. So much so that today, even though Coal India, after the Indian Railways, is the second biggest organization in India, Coal India has lost talent in underground mining. They cannot now put up a new underground mine without foreign assistance. While, okay, The idea is not to provoke you.
I think we are presuming on other sessions to follow. So let's conclude this in the next couple of minutes.
Yeah.
Talent. It is a question of geo-mining set up all the deposits. These deposits, take case of Singrauli. Many of you would have gone there. You would have seen 160 meter deep sea. Can you have an imagination that underground mining will give you even 1 million tons of coal? Singrauli as a whole, they're giving us 80 million tons of coal today. Not these mines cannot be worked by underground, let me tell you. To say that Coal India has lost a talent, it's not that. It is the so-called market economy has forced them to do it.
Agreed. I completely agree with you on
Listen,
that.
because 70% of our deposits are within 330 meters, entire deposits in the country. And they cannot be worked by underground mining because the recovery will be less than 20-25%. If you want to recover 90% of the resource, you have to do open cast mining.
Because you have to
So
leave
please
all those
don't-
pillars,
let's
etc.
not mix open cast underground here at all.
So the simple point is, coal was considered a derived demand. Instructions came, we want this GDP, this is the Planning Commission's approach, this has been approved by the entire Planning Commission and the Union Cabinet, now get me the coal. Okay, you did it by having large-scale open cast mining. So the reason I'm mentioning that is, so 1974, after the formation of NTPC, that was the first time when capacity building outpaced, in the power sector, outpaced coal production. Now the same thing is happening now, after investment was opened out to the private sector, and full advantage was taken by the private sector, capacity was built up, government encouraged it. Government encouraged it. In fact, told Power Trading Corporation to sign PPAs and then back-to-back have PPAs with DISCOMs as and when required, so that comfort is provided to the banks to lend money. So government was on the full side of the private investments that took place post the 2003 Act. I used to be chairman of the Expert Appraisal Committee of the Ministry of Environment and Forests, both for power projects and coal mining. And we used to get so many proposals. And everybody was completing the paper formality. The coal ministry for coal linkage requires a TOR.
Sir,
the TOR
sir,
has
the
to be
fact
provided
is,
by the
the
Environment
fact is,
Ministry.
coal, as Mr. Raja put it, was considered a derived thing. It is only in recent years that it has got the so-called prominence, where no,
Yes,
it's not.
yes.
It's not. No,
That is
sir,
the method planning was being done.
let me brief you.
So
In the first meeting of the Standing Committee of Parliament, this aspect of coal was raised because the coal allocations had been cancelled by the Supreme Court. So this whole issue was brought up, what happens to power? And it was said that all this power will be sourced through open tendering. It is only subsequently that all these injunctions came in that you have to go for medium-term contracts, only open tendering, reverse auction. They were never there in the realm of the Standing Committee on...
So I think I'll do a fast forward now. That is,
so I think we should...
so this is the wholesale market. Now you needed to develop a second market for you to go from the cost of production theory of value to the subjective preference theory of value. That is to have greater reliance on markets as opposed to a kind of government command economy. So you need a second market, that's a retail market. The retail market, the supply side are the DISCOMs, the distribution companies, and the demand side is the ultimate consumer, whether industrial consumer, domestic consumer, agriculture consumer, etc. And what was the magic wand for creating this retail market? The magic wand was open access. But open access can take place only if you progressively reduce cross-subsidy. So the Act itself provided, the Act is cleared by Parliament, that cross-subsidy will be progressively brought down and finally eliminated. Here I'll bring a bill to change that. So within a year, that provision was changed, amended in the Electricity Act, saying that cross-subsidy will be progressively brought down as may be prescribed by the regulator, as may be specified by the regulator. And then in the tariff policy it was provided that the cross-subsidy should not be more than plus minus 20% of the average cost of supply. But reduction in cross-subsidy was a precondition for open access to succeed. Again, government, the so-called, the reform people in the government. Who were the reformists? Certainly Mr. Montek Singh Ahluwalia, who was the deputy chairman of the planning commission at that time. And he had a very, very enthusiastic 24/7 working Gajendra Haldia as his advisor. And okay, this is okay.
I think Mr.
I'll complete in a
Raja's
few minutes.
knowledge is immense, and you can just sit and spend the whole dinner time with him. And
I'll finish the story. So basically, during the period of Montek Singh Ahluwalia as the deputy chairman planning commission, Dr. Manmohan Singh as the prime minister, Gajendra Haldia as the slave driver of Montek Singh, the power ministry was actually being run by the planning commission in policy matters. And they were keen to push this reform. So an order was issued, a circular was issued, that any consumer consuming more than 1 megawatt of power must necessarily purchase power from the market through open access. And that regulators will not fix the tariff of consumers consuming more than 1 megawatt of power. But this direction was issued under section 107 by the government of India to CERC, and CERC has nothing to do with distribution. SCRC, there is no provision in the Act. Only state governments can issue directions to SCRCs. So this circular, which had been signed by the power secretary, but literally dictated by the planning commission, was sent to all state governments also. But no state government issued directions under 108. But the reason I'm mentioning this is a further push to open access. But open access didn't take place. The reason is, of course, the argument given was the 1 megawatt and above are also free to purchase power from the MNCTCL or the state discoms. But which state discom MD will sit across the table and discuss and negotiate a rate that will go against CVC guidelines? There is bound to be a CBI inquiry against him of undue favor. Audit will find out that undue favor has been shown to such and such firm. He'll be in trouble for the rest of his life. So that was unimplementable. That was unimplementable in the administrative milieu which exists. Now, but the reformers who are economists still believe that this is possible. So the separation of carriage and content, they feel, is a shortcut for open access. Economist-wise, it is good. You're unbundling. Monopolies are bad. But there are various ways of introducing competition. The moment I separate carriage and contents, only the carriage, the company which holds the wires, only that tariff needs to be fixed by the regulator. Every other tariff will be determined by the market. Idea-wise, it's not a bad idea. Again, the point is, okay, once you take a decision, you must steadfast follow it. The problem with us is, even after decisions, we find subterfuges. Like the Raj Purohit committee said that in the previous form of this amendments, they said in a small print, like cigarette smoking is injurious to health. If you read the entire report, this can be taken up after 5 years, which was mentioned, after 5 years. Now in the new set of amendments, the same thing is being attempted. But this is again to push open access. Now, without asking the question, why didn't open access not succeed? Open access can still succeed. It can succeed if the cross-subsidy burden is taken by the state, let's say on a 50-50 sharing basis, by the Government of India and the state governments, and then tapered off over 10 years or 15 years. You see? So it is possible if you're steadfast in your decisions and don't, with every change of secretary and change of minister, there cannot be changes of policies, which unfortunately is happening, because that's why again the T20 test match comes. We have to play test matches. Thank you very much.
Wait, but then let's continue this after dinner. Thank you all for bearing up with this panel, and sorry for presuming upon the time of others. Sense up. Oh, after dinner. After dinner. Huh, not.
I would like to thank all our speakers for this session. Moving on to the next session for this afternoon, we have a session of cybersecurity in the power sector. May I please call upon our speakers for this session, Mr. Karan Dhol, Vice Chairman, Indian Eye Security Private Limited, Mr. P.K. Agarwal, Director and Chief Information Security Officer, POSOCO, Mr. Maroof Raza, Consultant Times Now, and Mr. Sanjeev Chawla, Deputy Director General, National Critical Infrastructure, Information Infrastructure Center, Protection Center.
Ladies and gentlemen, I am a bit of a stickler for controlling time. So unlike earlier sessions which went on as though there was no tomorrow, this one is going to be very, very spot on time. This current session is going to run for 1 hour, and the session after that will run for about half an hour, 40 minutes, and that's it. And I think I follow the dictum that the art of genius is to keep things short and simple. So if we can't convey our points in specific amount of time, I don't think we deserve to be here. So let me start now by very specifically giving you an introduction about cybersecurity and its importance in the critical industry and infrastructural areas where we need to really understand this, because in as much as we can keep talking about what the government did and what which government should have done, etc., quite clearly today's era, everything is going to be overtaken by the sheer power of computers and the ability of people to use computers and computer-related means to get even with you if you become more successful than them. They don't need strong array of missiles and aircrafts to blow up your infrastructure. Cyber attacks are something which is going to be extremely important. So I think, what does our session look at? Yeah, so cyber security. We've got a very distinguished panel of speakers. Before I get on to them, I'm going to give you in 5 minutes a little brief as I've understood. The first is performance and their reliability can be controlled both by computers and can be destroyed by the sheer power of computers. And therefore, electricity grids, which are complex systems with now having legacy equipment which are decades old, the systems were built without any security requirements that were taken into account then and are extremely vulnerable in India. So we can target whatever in the world, but I think we first have to look at guarding our backsides. And right now, we are extremely vulnerable. The second is, with the speed of digitization of the new grid systems would become vulnerable to attacks as your enemy or your adversary or your business rival decides to take you on and put you on the back step. So this doesn't apply only to Government of India undertakings. This applies to the private sector also. Let me give you 2 examples. Ukraine, which was highly dependent on computer-related virtually everything, it received a massive attack where over 700,000 people and their homes went completely blacked out for a few days. I've just read a report that the British government, after a lot of study, has come on to the conclusion that while Britain can't match Russia militarily, they seem to have had enough of Mr. Putin, and they've decided that it may be time very soon that Moscow will be without lights and electricity for 1 day. And once that happens, the message will go out to Moscow and anybody else that at the end of the day, you are helpless if you don't create robust infrastructure and robust capability to guard your infrastructure. CEOs of companies, managing directors of companies will need to address the cyber challenges. You cannot just leave it to the chief security officer or the chief information officer, because you cannot bypass the responsibility as the head of an organization only looking at balance sheets and hoping like hell that your balance sheet this year looks better than last year. It may just very quickly end up looking no good and touching zero because you'll be out of business. So please look at this seriously, pass this message on to everybody who you're connected with, that this is the highest sense of urgency that we must address this issue. And I'm not sort of playing it up because, I mean, the more people would argue that security experts or people who are in the security business would play it up to remain in business. Whether you like it or not, you are going to deny it at your own peril. Cyber terrorists are rapidly focusing on critical infrastructure and strategic industries. They are wanting to reach out wherever they can. This is the easiest way to get deniability for your attacks, the easiest way for a weak adversary to get even against a strong adversary, and the easiest way to put the fear of God into economies which thump their chest and say we are so powerful that we can steamroll our way into anything. So I think the power sector, which is an extremely, extremely important part of our lives, we've become extremely dependent on it, and the power sector is going to very clearly be the target. In fact, Home Ministry accounts have said that hundreds of such attacks are foiled, if not thousands of such attacks are foiled on a regular basis at critical infrastructure. But we are not doing enough to actually address that, and we seem to be in a state of denial or we seem to be wanting to push things under the carpet in the hope that nobody else gets to know about your weaknesses. It'll be better to share information. It'll be better to share your experiences with others, because you will gain from somebody else's support and experience in as much as he or she will. Computer industry automation is an area which is something that is on the radar screen of not just government-to-government attackers. So we often say the Chinese government has attacked so many amount of our infrastructural facilities, or the Pakistanis are doing it. But it is privately hired operators who are getting past everything that you are building. You may not be aware that the most secure computerized headquarters in the world is the NSA in the US. And the NSA has been broken through the firewalls by young 18-year-olds who did not go through the firewalls when the job, and it's commanded, the NSA in outside Washington is commanded by a lieutenant general, equivalent rank. So as far as the US Armed Forces is concerned, it's a major military operation. They've even given out a presidential doctrine to say a cyber attack on the US is an attack on the US, and it will be met with by the US with the full might and force of America's authority. But when an 18-year-old goes into the system, goes inside, peeks into all your information and comes out undetected, it leaves people rattled. They don't know where to start. So with that kind of a scenario in mind, I'll now throw it open. I'll first invite Karan Dhol to set the stage for where critical industries and critical infrastructure must prepare themselves for cyber attacks, and the other two speakers after that will follow. 15 minutes, Karan.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I know it's the fag end of the day, so I'm going to keep my talk really sweet and short. I'd actually planned to discuss various cyber attacks and get into examples and all. Since there's a paucity of time, I will not do that. I'm going to start with the word cyber security. Can anyone over here tell me where the word cyber comes from? Okay, so cyber comes from the Arabic word sifar, which means zero. So when we're talking about cyber security, what we're actually saying is zero security. So what is cyber security all about? It's about creating an illusion of security. It's about trying and closing as many floodgates as you can to prevent an attack. But like Mr. Raza just said, if the NSA could be hacked by an 18-year-old, I mean, anyone can. Now, there are 2-3 elements to cybersecurity. One is implementation of systems, which I'm sure eminent speakers here will be getting into. But the second and the most important part is usually ignored, and that is training. I'm going to give you an example of a public utility 2 years ago. They implemented all the possible measures for cybersecurity, but they did not train their build desk operators. As a result, the build desk operator was not aware of the potential of his terminal. And again, a young kid, he played the system, went up to the build desk operator and said, "Uncle, I've just appeared for my exams. Can I please check my email? I don't have email on my computer. I don't have internet or a computer." So the elderly gentleman who's a build desk guy thought, "Yeah, sweet young kid, let me let him." He said, "Sure, beta, come, use your system." While the operator wasn't looking, bills statuses were changed. So an industry which owed 15 lakhs was shown as paid. Another industry which owed 7 lakhs was shown as paid. Luckily, there was an audit just the next month. So CCTV records are still available. And using those CCTV records, they were able to track down who did what and solve the issue. But this is just one example of how you can have the best firewalls, the best system, the best network monitoring system, the best RATs, the best tools. Doesn't matter. All it takes is one person in this chain of security that does not know the potential or the effect of what he's doing. Okay. Second thing I want to talk about is in today's day and age, there's a huge trend of outsourcing. So you don't want to have a driver anymore, you outsource to Ola, Uber. You don't want to have to spend money to set up your own cybersecurity team, so what do? You hire a third party to do your cybersecurity audits and things like that. Ladies and gentlemen, that is like giving the keys of the kingdom to the most random stranger you can see. Now I'll explain why. Imagine a Fortune 500 IT company takes on maybe 40,000 or 50,000 audits in a year. Out of those audits, maybe 1,000 they will do themselves. The rest they will subcontract. When they subcontract, it goes to the lowest bidder. Then that lowest bidder will subcontract it to an even smaller organization or a single student or a young kid who's learning cybersecurity. Now, this guy or this girl has not too many prospects of employment beyond this. This is like a golden opportunity. It's like, le beta, tijori ki chavi lo. Take the keys to my safe. So now this kid, after he does the audit, he has access to all your data. And what he does with that data, God only knows. Second of all, apart from having access to your data, once he does the vulnerability assessment and penetration testing, he knows your weaknesses. He knows your vulnerabilities. And this is even before they are reported as zero-day vulnerabilities. Because only when he reports it, will it go to certain NCII PC who would then publish those vulnerabilities and try to find ways to patch them. So if I was that kid, and if I had a malicious intent, what I would do is, I would set up a VPN through Russia or Ukraine or one of these other countries, and I would exploit that. So recently, in one of the northern states in India, the distribution company was hacked. And the data of, I think, about 4,000 users, industrial users, was usurped. And then, all of a sudden, they see on their screens a message which says, pay us 1 crore or 10 crores or something like that, without which you will not get your data back. Now, here's where data redundancy comes in. And it's very important to understand the difference between data protection and redundancy. Because these were industrial users, various legal liabilities and risks did not come in. But what the government took a stand is that, look, we have a backup of the data. We just reformat our systems and we'll get our data back. Now, that solves part of the problem. That takes care of the ransom. But the vulnerability hasn't been addressed yet. And by the time they figure out what caused the vulnerability and how the hack happened, considerable time will have passed. And by then, maybe several other attacks could happen. And when you go from industrial consumers to retail consumers, there is a lot of sensitive data, like people's phone numbers, addresses, where they live, celebrities, for example. Now, classic case would be a hacker then selling that data to stalkers. You know, like somebody's a fan of Karishma Kapoor, you give me 5 lakhs, I'll tell you where Karishma Kapoor lives. Or, you know, I'll give you an example. So now, this data needs to be protected. Although, as per the data protection policy, this data doesn't come under sensitive personal information. It just comes under personal information. So that kind of absolves the legal liabilities of the utility, you know, to have to deal with that, and they just have to report it to the police. But there are several offshoot crimes or several chain reactions which could happen out of that single crime. So coming back to the outsourcing bit, I as a young kid with not too many prospects, what will I do? I will either charge a ransom for that data, or I will find a way to exploit that company, or go to the competitor of that company and say, look, you pay me so much and I'll destroy the data of this other company. Now, like Mr. Raza mentioned, we're just talking about protection of data till now. Sorry, I'm just talking about protection of data till now. Coming to espionage and cyber warfare, you'll be happy to know that I was one of the first people to point out that there's a group called Lazarus, and this was about 2 months before Symantec actually published the report. There's a group called Lazarus which has been doing a lot of major hacks. And for a long time, people thought it was based on North Korea, based out of North Korea. And that was actually just a decoy. The way they did that is they hacked the Sony Picture Corporation in 2016. Now, coming back to data protection, when they hacked Sony Pictures, they found an Excel sheet with 52 or 54 passwords. And these were sensitive passwords, but they were circulating on Excel sheets. So coming back to my very, very first point, the most important point is training. You need to train everybody on how you can be hacked, how you can prevent being hacked, how to protect your data, what are the best practices out there. And there are various organizations that do that. But then again comes the risk that do I give the keys to the kingdom to an unknown person? Now the next thing is it's a constant battle, because every few months you get an update or a patch for the operating system, you get an update or patch for the software you're using, and every time there's an update, every time there's a patch, every time there's a firmware upgrade, there is a possibility of new vulnerabilities popping up. Very recently, one of the largest drone manufacturers in the world, DJI, an Israeli cybersecurity company found out that, look, when you go to the DJI forum and you post something, your user ID handle is all you need to then access the feed of that drone. So now imagine a situation where there are, I think, well, they sell about 10,000 drones a day, so you can imagine how many of those drones are flying all over the world. Now just imagine all I need to do is go to the forum, and I pick up the guy's user ID, and I can see exactly where the drone is flying, what it is seeing, what data is collected and stored on the device, on the drone. Now this is a major, major security risk. Now add this with cyber warfare, and you have a situation where somebody sitting in another country can actually have eyes on sensitive installations in a different country, and nobody even knows about it. Nobody's the wiser. So how much time do I have left? 3 minutes, okay. Okay. Now, one of the things I want to mention is India's cyber policy states that every utility or every public utility must publish their policy and methodology of protection of data. I have one submission. My submission is this, that the way hackers operate is they try and find your processes, and then they try and find ways to plug holes in those processes. The minute I'm publishing my policy and the minute I'm publishing my method of protecting data, I'm actually exposing it. So this is something which I feel that in the coming future, the government needs to look at pretty seriously, because fixing this would fix a lot of problems. And lastly, I want to tell you about a hack that happened to, we were actually one of the guinea pigs for. So there is an organization called the KNFA. It's a Polish bank regulatory authority. It's the equivalent of RBI. Now, the KNFA website, they outsourced the website, obviously, the designing. Now, the designer bought a template from one of these template sites. Now, that template had something called a Java CSS style script sheet. Unknown to anyone, that style script sheet had a sleeper code in it. And once activated, it could not be detected till it was activated. This was, again, the work of Lazarus. Once activated, all of the computers which had it would have this active worm on it, and then it could be detected. Now imagine, every single bank in the country, and various international banks also, would go to this website to see what the new rules are, the new regulations are. And the very fact that they would enter this website, they would get hacked. Now this is called a watering hole attack. And just to give you some figures, 183 banks were affected, and the total attempted siphoned amount goes into, I think, about $6 or $8 billion. Luckily, the Federal Reserve was party to one of the transactions, as in their system was used for one of those transactions. So the minute they found $89 million being transferred out to another country without any of the required authorizations, they put a stop to it. Once they put a stop to it and got into investigation, they found out exactly what's happening. In this process, one of our websites was a decoy. So they would send the data to websites like ours, thousands of them, and then from there to other websites, and then to other websites, and then to try and make it more anonymous. Now, I could say, look, we had nothing to do with it. We cleared the bugs, and our website is safe. But that's not what happens nowadays. Nowadays, what happens is most large organizations, in their attempt to bring in better IT policies and IT protection policies, they use certain blacklisting and whitelisting services. So for example, Symantec has one called Blue Coat. Now, what Blue Coat did is immediately when our site was found with that malicious code, they blacklisted our site. Now, this particular site is used by various government agencies as well as private companies and really large companies as well. So the minute we got blacklisted, within 24 hours, we wrote to them and we said, look, yes, there was a hack, there was a problem, and we took care of it immediately. They did their research, they said, yes, you've solved the problem, and they removed the blacklisting. Finished? Okay. Now, what then happened is, 10 other of these whitelisting, blacklisting companies, they would just crawl what Symantec and others do. So by the time we got unblacklisted from here, another 10 sites had picked up that we were blacklisted. okay? So then we had to write to those 10 sites. By the time we wrote to those 10 sites, another 30 came. So as a result, I mean, it's bad enough to be a victim of a cybercrime. There are a lot of ways and means we need to look at, a lot of procedures we need to look at to make sure that the victim of cybercrime is not further victimized. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
I think, thanks, Karan, very much. You really put the fear of God again into the minds of people and alerted us. But, you know, let me sort of throw up one little fact before I invite Mr. Agarwal. You know, most of our industrial control components and their systems are operating IT software which is at the end of their lives. For example, Microsoft officially withdraws support for Windows NT 4.0 14 years ago. Hand on heart, many of you would probably agree with me that most of our companies, at least in India, are still operating on those systems. So you can understand that not only are your systems so weak that they can anyway crash because of a nudge given by somebody, but equally important, they are much more easier to hack. And it is the easiest way, not Pakistan, not China, which are amongst the top countries that do hacking, but do you know that the top hacker in the world is the United States? And therefore, anybody would like to get a business advantage over you would be looking at a cyber attack. And I'm not talking of state-to-state cyber attack like Stuxnet, which immobilized Iran's nuclear program for many months till they bounced back because they completely neutralized many of the equipment that was working in it. We in India were amongst the top 3 sufferers of the Stuxnet attack which took place in Iran. So we are not far away from our power sector, and that was really at the power sector, if Iran's arguments are to be believed that it's purely for energy purposes, their nuclear program. So our power sector remains extremely vulnerable. I now invite Mr. Agarwal.
Presentation. So I identified this. So here is also presentation. We have already identified there. Yeah. So I am P.K. Agrawal from Power System Operation Corporation. So I am director also and CISO also. I think this is first PSU where CISO is a part of board member. So my presentation is mostly on technical grounds. And I think I will start from here. Let's just see. So my overview of my presentation is like first I will just dwell on how this industrial control systems, this power system is basically industrial control system, and there are many sub part of industrial control center like DCS, PCS, and the SCADA, and then what are the cyber threats on power control system, power sector, ICS or power sector, and then the strategies for and then इसको आगे बढ़ाइए.
We've just had a cyber attack.
It is simulated cyber attack.
Unfortunately, PPT में ही फंस गए आप, तो जब सिस्टम पे अटैक आएगा तो क्या होगा?
These are side effects of technologies. Then strategies, what are the strategies we should follow and best practices for ensuring the cyber security? So first, yeah, I put it this side. So our main purpose is the energy surety and sustainability. Our system should be reliable. It should not have any outage because of cybersecurity. But all power systems are control centers. All power systems are industrial control center. And industrial control center uses IT. So more and more IT it uses, and more vulnerabilities comes from IT to ICS, which is the power sector. But our power sector ICS, are they secure? Let us see. So basically, power sector is power system completely full of industrial control center. At power projects, we have DCS, distribution control center, PCS, process control center, controlling the pulverized mills, controlling the water system of system, and then distribution control center controlling the substations, and then SCADA, supervisory control and data acquisition system, which controls the grid control centers. These are the many part of power system, complete power system supply chain, and all are full of industrial control center. So these are the footprints. Generator control systems, which is an industrial control systems, smart grid automation, utility monitoring and control systems, transmission distribution, fuel management, power quality and UPS, renewable energy control systems through inverter control. So all are full of ICS, and that's why we have many vulnerability in the system. So who are the sources for this? It may be national governments, like Mr. Masroom Raza tells that it may be any state which are enemy to you, which want to paralyze to you. Terrorist. So now cyber terrorists, and then industrial spies, then crime groups. Sorry. And then hacktivists. Now previously it was activists who were doing the demonstration physically. Now the hacktivists who uses the cyber threats for their cause. And then hackers. It's not the normal hackers. They are the trained hackers doing for control systems. And then what are the threats? Insider threats, which is the more dangerous. Basically, insider threats is the more dangerous than outsider threats. Disgruntled employees, and then disgruntled contractor to take advantage of their approach. Then active agencies, competitors can also cyber attack to you. Then organized crimes for a gain, and then others. And this attack on power system is increasing day by day. I think we can remember the first attack on power system 2014-15, where they entered the power control centers through IT systems. Basically, in general, wherever the attacks has happened, it is through IT systems. They are through corporate IT or IT systems. They are going to a SCADA control centers. So they entered through an IT system, through an email attachment, and switched off many feeders in substations. And they also corrupted the SCADA system, which becomes difficult to recover. And now we can have the first malware, which is called cached override. It is not cached overdrive, cached override. This is available, and it is basically targeted for electricity systems. So what are the possibilities, how we can control the cyber attacks, or we can ensure our cyber security over power system? There are 7 strategies which I found from the Department of Homeland Security. These 7 strategies to effectively defend Industrial Control Center. Basically, ideally we should have cyber security policies and then many controls, but these 7 strategies can be implemented is very, very fast and with little effort. First is the application whitelisting. So only the application required for a SCADA system should be installed, and all other applications should be removed from there. So on the whitelisted applications should be installed there, and then ensure the configuration and patch management. Proper configuration is very, very necessary for a network, SCADA network. So and then patch management. Whenever there is any vulnerability detected, patch should be applied for that. Then reduce your attack surface. Reducing attack surface means reduce the interface areas where data exchange takes place. And then build a defendable environment like perimeter security. And then manage authentication. Whenever attacks happens, they escalate the privilege of sub-users. So we should manage, or we should monitor the authentication systems. Is there any unwanted user? Monitor and respond. Monitor and respond means a quick response, a fast response is very, very necessary to reduce the further damage. So we should do the continuous monitoring and respond to any signals. And then implement secure remote access. Remote access is very, very necessary for doing the remote maintenance. But we should have the a secure remote access. It should be only whenever required. It should not be always connected. And then use other industries' best practices like network security firewalls, DMZ implementations, whitelisted connections which are only trusted should be connected directly, otherwise it should be through the routers. Whitelisting applications, I already told that. Secure internet services from internet, we have to allow the internet connection to our system, so it should be secure. Then using system which have gone third-party audit. So audited systems should be used. Upgrading legacy ICS. As Mr. Masoor Maja told that there are many systems, many control systems, they are still deploying the Microsoft Windows XP, Windows NT. So we should stop that, and it should be upgraded to the new system. Upgrading operating systems and developing packet inspection is possible. So deep packet inspection like DPI, there are routers which are DPI that should be used. Then secure ICS planning and design services. And then third-party audits. And then there is one thing that's secure by design. Secure by design, we should have a segmented SCADA architecture. So like the servers which are more secure, which are more important, should be on a more secure LAN. Then corporate IT and other IT systems should be on the separate LAN. So it is zone conduit architecture. It is a IEC standard. Then segmented firewall. Today's SCADA cannot be isolated. We have to share the data with many stakeholders. So we should use the segmented DMZ, where only restriction is that data should come from inside to outside. There is no request should go from outside to inside. So we can have a replica data server, and then all data is coming from inside data server is being copied to the outside server, and then from outside we can share the data with stakeholders. And then defense and depth security. So one security control is not sufficient. We should have multiple controls, security controls, like first perimeter, then access control, then network architecture, then operating system, host security, then application security, and the code personal security. Then secure by governance. We should have policies and compliance. Like everyone should have cyber security policy. And then there should be a CISO also. But CISO is not sufficient. Company think that if we nominated CISO, we become secure. So security is not a responsibility of only CISO. Actually, security is a responsibility for all. And we should be fully dependent on CISO. We should cooperate with him. Then certification, regular certification is very, very important. It should be annual, it should be 6 months. So like we can implement ISMS 27001, which has regular security, third-party security. Then BAPT and compliance, vulnerability and penetration test is very, very important. And then compliance is much more important than BAPT test. Then adoption of standard framework, like 7 strategies I told before that, like we can adopt there are many standards, smart grid security standard, NIST standards. And it is preferable to have a security control center because monitoring and responding fast is very, very important. In the last, there is nothing like absolute security. So whatever security controls we are having, we should not think that it is the absolute one. It should be evolving always. Every requirement is unique. Every solution is also unique. So it cannot be a copy-paste system. Some control has been put on one system, then other system might require some different control. Security comes at cost. So I need optimization. So we cannot spend more than the cost of asset on security. Secure real-time information is a key factor to reliable delivery of power to end users. Then this is the more important thing. The human element is the strongest link in the cyber security, but is also weakest link if they are not aware. If I have time, then I have a small okay. Then security is not the whole responsibility of CISO. We should develop a culture of security. Only then we can be secure. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Agarwal. You obviously reinforced the point that I was making that, security cannot be left to one person. I remember a former army colleague of mine who was with the special forces. He left that. DLF in Gurgaon employed him as the chief of security, gave him a fat salary, but gave him no other assets. So I was sitting with him one day with a British security expert who actually was Richard, who was part of our ISL network. And I asked him, what about how are you going to look after cyber? Funnily, that place is called Cyber Hub, And I said, how are you going to look after that? He said, sir, I asked them for assets, and they said, you either take a salary or you put that money into creating a security network. But this is the amount of money that we have decided to put aside on that. And the second thing, and which is equally important to understand, is, you see, it has to be all relative. It was brought out that you cannot over-invest in security and not in your infrastructure, but you have to synchronize both. You have to ensure that the infrastructure that you bring in automatically provides you a certain amount of security. For instance, the software that you are using. You can't have all glitzy equipment outside, but the software which is vintage. Equally, if the power grid collapses, then a lot of other allied facilities will collapse with that. Hospitals, airports, transportation network, telephone networks. So the importance of ensuring the cyber security of the power grids or the power infrastructure or the critical infrastructure in the power industry is so important. It is not just to ensure that the lights keep on there in the critical infrastructure body that is attacked. It is connected to everything else in the country. So the country can be brought to a standstill in so many other ways. I now invite our next speaker, and then time permitting, we might have Q&A or we might just move to the next session. Aiye, sir.
Thank you very much to all my previous speakers. I think they have made my job easier. And I also appreciate the efforts put in by IPPAI for holding this function here and giving an opportunity to the small towns. I'm looking after the task of National Critical Information Infrastructure Protection Center, NCIIPC. Basically, NCIIPC was created in 2016. And our mandate was to provide a secure, safe environment to the critical information infrastructures. As we all know, I think ICT, information and communication technology, has entered into all walks of life. Am I right? So whether we talk about medical, we talk about transport, we talk about power, we talk about any other field, the computer or the other aspects are very clearly visible, and we all are aware that among all those services which are available, because I think with the recent government, we have seen there's a lot of push on digitalization, and lot of payment gateways, lot of other infrastructure is made available on the computers. So this makes our job more challenging, more Herculean. So to address these things, NCIIPC has identified 6 critical sectors. Those sectors are, can I see my presentation please? Those sectors are basically BFSI, banking and financial sector. There is the power sector, power and energy. We have got transport. Then we have got strategic and public industry. We have got state governments and central government. So all these 6 sectors. Another very important is the telecom. Sorry, I just forget. Telecom is another thing. But I think if we go through the whole these 6 sectors, we will find that power is the mother sector. And if I'm not wrong, it is the power sector which holds the key. And I know, as everybody has mentioned about the cyberspace. Cyberspace is a one space which is a borderless ecosystem. Earlier the myth was that, okay, fine, the external threats will be taken care by the forces, and internal threats, the internal law and order will be taken care by the policing. But now there is a third dimension. Of course, there are many more things like space and other things, but I'm just talking about these 3. Cyberspace is one which is a borderless ecosystem, where whether you are sitting just 35 kilometers away from this country, or you are within the country, or maybe 10,000 kilometers away from this place. But still you can launch a cyber attack. Still you can destabilize the system. You can stop the services. So keeping all these things, what is important is to understand, of course we all are very clear, ICT is available, as I mentioned, information infrastructure is available in all walks of life, but there is a very selected part which is known as critical information infrastructure. And like Government of India in section 70, IT Act 2000 has specified any computer resource or any network incapacitation or destruction of which shall have debilitating impact on national security, economy, public health or safety. So this is a basic definition, these 4 parameters which impact the NCIIPC. So we identify the critical information infrastructure among the various entities. So these are the critical sectors which are very prime or important to us, I think. But at the end of the day, if we see, it is the power and energy which is the prime mother sector, because all rest of the things, whether we call it as a, I will just skip my presentation, it's already. So from here we can understand, like we have got cyberspace, we have critical sectors, we have CII. Again in CII, of course I have identified sector as critical sector, power sector. But among the power sector, when you go back, you have to see what is critical. Maybe you have got 100 systems which are deployed in your control mechanism, but maybe 2 or 3 are the servers, are the main core which controls the activity of your systems. Hence, those systems needs to be declared as protected systems which nobody can touch. If somebody touches, the law empowers us to provide them with severe penalties and punishments. And as I mentioned, the power sector is the mother sector, whether it's a telecom, it's a banking and financial sectors, or it is transport or health. Every sector depends upon the power sector. Of course, cyber threat, as my colleague has earlier mentioned, I think we are very well aware about the Cosmos Bank, where 94 crore was siphoned off within 2 days. I think all of us are aware about the August. And of course, there are many other attacks which I have just mentioned, whether it's I think the Ukrainian thing has already been, I think, talked about, so I will not cover this. Similarly, I think the nuclear power plant was also attacked in 2016, October. So again, I think we know the country, and we are very well aware. So it is not important to say that, okay, if somebody is a developing country or it is upcoming country, so they can do. No, that was something which happened in the developed nation. So please, we have to understand one thing. Security is a dynamic in nature. It is not a static. So one-time effort is not going to solve our problem. It is a continuous, consistent effort which is required to be put in place to control our systems. Of course, whatever we talk about, we know CII, the critical information structures are very complex in nature. They are distributed and interconnected and of course interdependent. Like as I mentioned, the power sector is the one which is mother sector. All other sectors depend upon it heavily. Of course, the damage or destruction of CII can stop the critical services to the nation. It can halt many things. And similarly, destruction of degradation of services can take place. Loss of sensitive information, strategic information, or loss of reputation is another very big point. There are various challenges, in CII. One is information and communication system convergence. I think as Agrawal has also mentioned, and this is one of the points which I also wanted to speak on. We all know that OT and IT. IT, when I refer, I basically refer to the enterprise solutions which you have deployed on your system for billing, for controlling the other things. Whereas the OT is a operational technology, is a purely controlling the technical area. So these two networks, these two systems should be separate. At no point of time, they should be the same. Because this is the one major vulnerability which has come into play. And other thing which I feel is important, as one of my speakers mentioned, I think we all are very well aware. Whenever any software expires, the date of expiry is mentioned by the firm. When they withdraw the support, they clearly mention that next 1 year or 9 months, they are going to give you the time. So by that time, I think we should make sure that proper licensed version software should be used. Somewhere or other, I think, in government departments also, or even privates also, I have seen many times we just take it very easily and we continue with it and we say chalta hai. I think that attitude needs to be dropped. Another thing which is important is open supply chain contamination. I think this is a very important point. Of course, we have to see what measures we have to take, because whenever we get, because majority of the products which you are getting in our country are from the foreign soil. So we have to make sure that some overlay of security layer is put in place, so that even if some contamination is there, we are able to contain it. We are able to address the issue. So these are the issues which I feel will be important for us to take into account. But at the same time, I think we should not shy off or share the information, or if we are attacked, Because majority of the organizations, I think one of my speakers mentioned about the 4,000. See, the issue is many times the organizations, they don't come up and share the information. Even if the cyber attack takes place, the CISO fears, oh, something is gone wrong, so my job is at stake. Similarly, CEOs and CFOs or other senior colleagues, they feel, but I think it's better to share that information so that the nodal body gets that information and disseminate that information to the various other stakeholders so that they can prevent similar attacks on the country side. And in a similar fashion, I think I will say the mention of this 4,000 users. I know that attack. Only thing is, in that case also, the agency has put in place both the systems at a common platform. That was OT as well as enterprise. And there was a clear-cut issue with the IT infrastructure. Hence, the person is able to penetrate. As far as the VAT is concerned, vulnerability assessment and penetration testing, yes, I know many of the world over countries are, I think, doing their scanning. They are doing VAT to our sites. At the same time, our people are also on this task. And NCIIPC has already put in place a very good program known as RVDP. That is a responsible vulnerability disclosure process. In this system, if somebody finds out some vulnerability, he can just mail us. And we will take into account that vulnerability and we'll see how it can be addressed immediately. At the same time, we also acknowledge that gentleman whosoever has put in that vulnerability. And again, we don't depend upon the bug bounties and other things where money is exchanged. So in this way, what we are doing, we are basically raising the level of awareness among the various stakeholders. We are also conducting workshops, trainings, and other things, or CII. So in this manner, I think we are able to address the issues. I think one last point which I would like to share is CISO. Yes, I've seen many of the chief information security officers. Many times so happen, if a person is not loaded with the proper workload, the chief says, okay, fine, just assign the CISO's job. I think this kind of attitude is not correct. Please make sure whenever you declare or mention the name of any CISO, he should be properly qualified, he should have the proper tools, he should have the proper training, and most important is each and every member of team should be thoroughly trained so that they can independently take care of the decisions, they can take care of the situations. Thanks a lot.
I think all our experts have made very comprehensive presentations. You know, an interesting fact that I have come across also, that the government of India, when it decided to put together this initiative under Section 78 of 70A, of the IT Act, it identified 12 areas primarily where it would be 12 sectors where it should be covered under 6. I was told 12. So 6, that means they've narrowed down further. But I think the most important thing to understand is cyber attackers see no boundaries. It is the cheapest way to get even with countries, infrastructure, businesses, and most importantly, in India, I don't know who's speaking in the background. यार आप लोग का काम है यहाँ की आवाज दूसरों को पहुँचाना, आपकी आवाज यहाँ नहीं पहुँचाना. अजीब बात नहीं हो, फोन पे लगे हुए हो यहाँ पे सबके सामने. India is one of the largest countries where it is facing a huge number of increase in cyber attacks. Projected figures are 10% increase every year if we don't get our act together. But the interesting thing, and I go back to a point Mr. Dhol made earlier in the morning, that we are aping a lot of things from the West, but are we also aping some of their cyber security and critical infrastructure protection methodologies? Because that is something that we could do with, considering the nature of cyber attacks across the world is quite similar. So the pattern and the nature is similar, and I have requested both our distinguished speakers here that if their presentations can be shared with you all through our IPPAI network, so that more of you can go back to your organizations and alert the organizations that we need to do more to basically understand. अगर आप समझोगे नहीं कहाँ से प्रॉब्लम आ रही है, you will not be able to fortify yourself against the attack which sooner or later will hit you. Now we are terribly short of time, ladies and gentlemen, so I'm taking the liberty of winding up this session without opening it up any further and requesting the next set of panelists to come in so that we go into the drones and the smart city session, which is very much Karan's forte. So I would like you to give a good hand for the effort our two speakers have made to put together a PPT and presentation. Okay. Oh, that's good news. So we've just been told that the last session has been shifted to tomorrow. So we've got time for Q&A. So and we've got two really, actually three experts on cyber issues. Sir? No, sir, by the way. So the thing is, please ask questions. I would request you to ask a question and not make a statement, so that a specific answer can be given from the basis of your question. Any questions, please shoot. I was told, Raghav told me they're not sure of what times. Okay, sir. So should we wind up and then let him?
Questions can be asked after he finishes.
Okay, so his speech and then the
Yeah, please. Okay.
So we have a speaker who's going to do a long distance presentation, and then maybe you can engage with our experts. So I've asked the panelists to sit and listen to the presentation from the US and then come up again for any Q&A if they wish to.
Yes. I'm going to hang up this phone. Can you hear me? Hello there. Hello there. Can you hear me? Okay. Shall I begin? Well, good afternoon, and thank you for giving me this opportunity. Can you hear me okay, Raghav? Okay, very good. Well, thank you for having me, and congratulations on having such a good turnout at such an important conference. I'm going to discuss the topic of moving from monopoly to competition and ask the question, after 40 years of effort, what lessons have we learned? I'm going to focus on the United States experience because I don't think it has aspects that are so unique that you can't use them in India. I'm going to address four major topics. First, I want to stress that preparing to convert a historically monopolistic industry requires a logical sequence of thinking and actions. Secondly, when you actually convert the industry, that requires a distinct logical sequence. Thirdly, I'm going to discuss briefly our experience in telecom, wholesale generation, and retail electricity to show you what we have done right and done wrong here in the United States. And then I want to discuss some features of the new field of behavioral economics, which can teach us something about how to correct some mental biases that are making it difficult to implement competition. Now, Raghav, can you hear me okay so far? Then let's start. When we prepare to convert an industry from a monopolistic history to a competitive future, there's a logical sequence. It may seem strange, but we have to start by defining the purpose of regulation. The purpose of regulation is performance. The performance of the industry that we're trying to regulate. We need to focus not just on the incumbent and its financial health. We need to focus on the economic efficiency and the technological reliability of the industry itself. Now, we induce performance by ensuring that the behavior of each of the players in the market is consistent with economic efficiency, with reliability, and with the range of products and services that customers want. You have to start by asking what do customers want, what does industrial development want, what does the economy want. We have to then decide what types of players will produce the products and services that we need. We have to decide what is the conduct of those players that will produce that performance. And we have to decide what's the market structure that will attract the type of players and induce the type of conduct that will produce the performance that we want. Those three things, structure, conduct, and performance. Structure, conduct, performance are the ingredients for a successful transition from a monopoly market to a competitive market. I stress this because so many policymakers want to skip the analysis and move to their fantasies. They fantasize about competition, they pray for competition, but they don't analyze the features of structure, conduct, and performance so they can arrange competition to produce the results they desire. Now, another feature that we often omitted in the United States is to define the public interest that we're trying to pursue. We have to ask, what is the mix of services that we desire? What are the standards for providing those services? What type of quality, cost, safety, innovation, environmental compatibility, service territory preparation, the things that we need to prepare for to achieve those objectives. What is the level of performance that we want? Do we want excellence? Do we want medium performance? Do we want poor but adequate performance? We fail to define those standards, we're unable to achieve them. Then we have to ask the question, to induce the necessary performance, who are the appropriate actors? Do we want government providers? Do we want private providers? Do we want private-public partnerships? What are the types of companies? Do we want just domestic companies? Do we want international companies? How do we want them financed? Do we want finance through publicly issued securities? Do we want them financed through private equity buyouts? Do we want family companies? Do we want other types of companies? Failing to identify the types of investors, types of companies, the types of conduct leads to a result which will vary from what we're hoping for. We also want to ask the question, then market structures. Competition works when we have a market structure with a sufficient number of viable providers who have access to essential facilities, access to financing, access to customer data, access to all the things necessary to succeed. There are some services that still require a monopoly function. You don't want to have multiple air traffic controllers at the airport. You want to have a single air traffic controller, and you don't want that air traffic controller controlling one of the airlines. You have to have independence of the monopoly function from the competitive function. In our country, we still struggle with this. I learned years ago from one of my mentors that everybody wants competition and every competitor wants to be a monopoly. And so because every competitor wants to be a monopoly, there have to be protections against enabling monopolies to competitors at the same time. That's been the most significant flaw in our country in electricity, in gas, in telecommunications, is to allow the provider of the monopoly service also to provide the competitive service. Now, once we have figured out what are the products and services that we want, once we have figured out what type of conduct will produce those products and services, once we have figured out what types of companies and what types of market structures will most likely produce those products and services cost effectively, then we have to ask the question, what are the types of regulation that are necessary to produce all of those topics? I tell my students not to use the word deregulation because it has no clear definition. There is no way to bring competition into a historically monopolistic market without some form of regulation. Some form of regulation about market structure, about corporate structure, about financing, about quality of service. There will always be a need for some form of regulation. We don't over-regulate. We need to identify what are the types of private behaviors that, unregulated, will contrary to the public interest, that we need to fashion the forms of regulation to address those behaviors. Regulation should be no more nor no less than necessary to align those private behaviors with the public interest. Well, Raghav, let me pause and see if there are any questions before I turn to some topics related to our transition in the United States. Raghav, back to you.
he's now driven to the point where he has to abide by what his masters say, because in India it is a concurrent subject, and each state elects or rather selects their own regulators, and they are sworn into office by the state bar minister. Okay. So in that sense, they are indebted to see to it that they take care of the incumbent distribution company, which in 98% of the cases is government owned. The third point that you talked about, which was very important, is there is a huge debate out there, and let me give you the background. The debate is that you have a situation where government and state distribution companies are being forced into non-negotiated, competition-based, tender-based competitive bidding. The objective of that is not really as one would imagine, getting the best price. The objective is to protect the bureaucrat from being accused of siding or sniffling up to any private sector in case he does a cost-plus contract, which is negotiated, but it is on a cost-plus basis and there is no tender for it. Our courts have held that both sections 62 and 63 of our Act allow for cost-plus negotiated tariffs under 62, and 63 is competitive bid. But nobody is touching 62. Very few people have the guts to do it today because they fear that they will get into trouble. So I want to just end my interjection with one point. If you remember Scythe Energy and what happened to them up there in Calgary when they set up a brand new plant, two gas-based machines, and they were about to start up, and they were competitively bid, running 5 cents plus, when Darlington and Bruce opened up in Canada and offered nuclear power at 1.5 or 2 cents or whatever.
Complete separation. One will always have a type of problem talking about. I gather that the second problem is a desire to maintain some publicly owned assets to have some role for the public sector ownership of assets. For the company to continue to own the assets, but it can still contract out competitive providers the job of selling. I understand the sentiment among the populace sometimes to retain the family jewels, keep public ownership, the most assets that are important for the economy of the nation. But one can do that use competition in the operations section. One can use franchise sections to reduce competition, even as the government owns the assets. But once you allow it to continue to provide particular services, you risk that problem that you talk about. I have always felt that the best solution in various markets is to have diverse players, to have some players that are publicly owned, some players that are privately owned, some hybrids, but then to make sure that no player has unearned or unfair advantage in that competition. That takes more work. It sounds like you have got for that point. You also mentioned I think I heard by regulatarians. I have to tell you that that's a problem in our country. Now what happens when a regulator is insufficiently prepared comes to its education and resources is the regulator confers. The word that's often used is the regulator. So regulator thinks independently. So regulator builds its own independent sources. Always ask for the answer from the entity that's the most informed in the room, and that tends to be the incumbent monopoly. And so you have and the regulator saying yes. That's the biggest risk if one is implementing competition is not to have a regulator which has the equivalence and expertise to the utility. Back to you, Raghav, if there are other questions.
And we are very concerned about the fact that all of this bidding is without energy storage costs put into it. So I'm looking at my favorite doomsday phenomenon for 2020 is the collapse of the renewable program due to the fact that we already got competitively bid rates running at about 2.5, 3 cents, 4 cents, and that's without the storage. And unfortunately, the sun is not shining at night.
Yes, if I understand what you said, I'm sorry, were you finished?
Absolutely.
Yeah. There's of course a difference between capacity. The organized markets in the United States, which have become most volatile, most unpredictable, most unstable, are the ones that are using energy price bidding for purposes of acquiring sufficient capacity. I've always thought that the better approach is to have separate competitive bids for different products. Have a competitive bidding process for capacity. Have a separate competitive bidding process for energy. That way, if the prices for energy become very low, well, they may be low because some people have low variable costs. But if you have a separate market for capacity, you're procuring enough capacity at higher price, so that those who need those higher prices still enter the market. Now, if you're looking to have storage as a substitute for capacity or supplement for capacity, why not have a separate marketplace for storage? And this is, of course, then why you need that central planner, that central traffic controller who can decide what is the mix between storage, firm capacity, and between variable energy, so that the total is what the population at total lowest long-term cost. If you always focused on bidding in short-term nature, you will not acquire the long-term capacity that you need. Back to you, Raghav. Yes, sir, Harry. How are you doing? I'm sorry, I did not hear. Yes. Well, thank you. So what I'd like to turn in the final few minutes here is some comments about the field of behavioral economics. Just in the last year, the Nobel Prize for economics was given to somebody who's very purpose to undermine the central principle of economics, and that is that human beings are rational. And I have found it useful to focus that type of thinking into the regulated sector. So let me identify psychological biases that the behavioral economics have found. Can you still hear me? Can you still hear me? Yeah. So first of all is this notion of anchoring. You know, they did an experiment with a bunch of students. They put them into two separate groups, and they gave each one of those wheels of fortune that you spin and it lands on a number. And they asked the students to spin the wheel, and at the same time estimate the number of African countries in the United Nations. And they did the experiment again and again. Now the wheel was rigged. So for one group, the wheel always landed on a 10, and in the other group, the wheel always landed on a 5. And it turned out that the group the wheel landed on the lower number always estimated that percentage of United Nations countries was low, and the group that had the landing on the high number always to estimate the percentage of African countries in the United States as high. And so this irrelevant wheel influenced the way people about a unrelated topic. And I found that in my business this happens all the time. That when a utility proposes a $75 million rate increase, that $75 million number becomes what's called the anchor. Everybody assesses the case in terms of $75 million. Should the utility get a $75 million rate increase or not? And when the regulator says, well, you're only getting $40 million, the press release says you $35 million. And the real question always should be not do they deserve $75 million, but what should it cost to operate this utility? So the anchoring of the frames things influences the way people make decision. And the way that works in the electric industry, I've found is that a utility will always come to a regulator talking about its own survival. What do I need to make a profit? What do I need to be successful? And the whole case on how to make that utility healthy, how to make it successful. And we forget about the more objective question, which is what are the steps we have to take to make this competitive. When we talk about competition, it's never about the health of the company. It's about the quality and the vigor of competition in the market. Now, a second psychological bias that behavioral economics talk about is what's called the halo effect. You know, an angel has a halo on its head, that circle above the head that shines to show how pure they are. Well, utilities use the halo effect. Most people is awesome that you can flick and a light goes on. Smoke goes up 500 miles away. Light goes on. And so what we find is that regulators who are in awe of the utilities engineering expertise become subservient to the utilities financial desire. That's what we call the halo effect. Confusing our respect engineering with our deference to the utilities financial desire. So those are two things that I find affect the quality of regulation and the quality of regulators. I'll summarize by reiterating something I said before. There is no substitute for two things. One is to use a logical sequence in progressing from a historically monopolistic market to a competitive market. That means identifying the services, identifying the types of companies who can provide those products and services most cost effectively, identifying the conduct that leads to performance, identifying the market structures that will produce that conduct. And secondly, with respect to the regulatory institutions, identifying identifying the best people for the law, the engineering, economics, the finance, accounting, and the politics management, and make sure that regulator is funded with resources and expertise equivalent to market players whose conduct regulate. And with that, Harry Dahl, back to you.
Well, Scott, that is very good. I just want to share with you and perhaps ask you this question. If you remember in the telecom sector way back in the United States, you guys refederalized telecom and you centralized telecom, if you recall. And there is a move now here to for the first time in this country's history to federalize and centralize the power sector by moving a new legislation. This stems from the frustration of not being able to contain the different regimes of different political parties that are perhaps running the show and do not follow the shall we say the merit order that the center is suggesting to them. So, for example, New York City runs on its own, doesn't listen to what the FERC has to say, and fixes its own tariff, gives its own subsidies. Then you go down and find that North Carolina is doing something different, and Minnesota is doing something completely different. So there's a move now. In fact, I would say there's a mood now to federalize the entire power sector in India, which means an amendment to our constitution because of this frustration. My question to you is what has been your thought process about this kind of refederalization or centralization of utilities such as telecom and power? What's been your experience in the United States? What's your quick take on it?
That really is an excellent question. Thank you, and one that I've given great thought about. Let me answer the question by focusing on the power sector and distinguishing several things. What I want to distinguish things in particular: wholesale markets, retail markets, and reliability. Wholesale markets, retail market reliability. Let me start with reliability. What we've found in the 1990s is that as we introduced competition, we no longer assure ourselves that the reliability of the electric network remains sound because the traffic pattern, people putting power in, power out, are no longer as predictable as they were in the old vertically integrated monopoly conditions. And so starting in 2005, have federal reliability function. So we now have something called North American Electric Reliability Corporation, and it is the national traffic reliability. It issues standards that must be obeyed by every user, owner, and operator of the electric in the United States. Now, this national entity, which itself is regulated by our federal regulator, it issues these rules. It can also delegate certain reliability functions to regional organizations, but only with oversight. And I think it is everybody's view that the reliability of the electric industry in the United States is far more secure today because of the federalization of the reliability function. Because before then there were no standards, there was no enforcement, there was no uniformity. The entire reliability function was done voluntarily by utilities who were now in competition with each other. And so there was a risk of parts of the country starving their systems to keep their prices low, and other parts of the country having to deal with the reliability effect. So I would argue consensus in our country is that the federalization of liability function has been largely successful. This is especially important now that we are discovering extensive threats form of cybersecurity, and the notion that there are different states with very expertise levels trying to protect the national network against cyber sabotage was a fantasy. And so I think we are very well served by the federalization of reliability. Now turning to wholesale markets, beginning in 2000, a trend toward something called regional transmission organizations began. And so in most of the country, not all of the country, most of the country, we now have reliability organizations that are non-profit. They are transmission organizations. They take control of the regional transmission system from the individual transmission owners. So the individual transmission owners retain ownership passively of their facilities, but contractually they transfer control to this RTO, whose job it is to plan the regional transmission system to accommodate the flow of power and to accommodate least cost dispatch on the 5 minute basis. So these regional transmission organizations operate and plan the transmission system. They also operate capacity and energy markets for the region. And so there is a neutral facilitator of trading at the center of these regions, and you don't have therefore the biases that historically was the problem when you monopoly to participate in a competitive market. So that is the liability function, the wholesale function. On the retail side, we still have decisions about whether to have competition or monopoly done on a 50-state basis. That has pros and cons. My view is that smaller states not having success introducing retail competition because they lack the investment resources necessary to make it work. As you may know, in telecommunications, our federal lawmaking Congress mandated that there shall be no telephone monopolies at the local level. But in electricity, we do not have that congressional action. So we still have very different market structures at retail throughout the country. So with that, I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you. That was useful. One question. What is the status of PUCA now? PUHCA. I believe there was an amendment during Clinton's time which allowed monopolies to invest outside their geographical footprint. Does that still remain, or what's the update on that?
Well, I have to smile. You're talking to the world's experts on a statute that no longer exists. You're referring to the Public Utility Holding Company Act of 1935, and I have the dubious distinction of being one of the very few people in the world who still cares about the statute. So to make the long story short, from 1935 to 2005, this statute prohibited severely limited two different things. One thing would be the long ownership, so that a utility on our west coast could not own utilities on the east coast. It could only own utilities that were integrated in a local manner. That was to prevent the empire building that created instability in the industry in the 1930s. And the second of the old Holding Company Act to prohibit or limit fixing of utility and non-utility businesses in the same corporate family, because the concern there was that the monopoly profits subsidized pricing in a competitive market. So from the 1935 to 2005, the statute essentially kept the industry local Most of the utilities were local, vertically integrated companies that served only within their local area. Since 2005, when the statute was repealed, we have had many mergers. We have today approximately 40% of the number of independent utilities that we had 20 years ago. We now have mergers of merged companies, so that the industry is consolidating, complicating at a fairly rapid rate. We have private equity buyouts, international owners, we have vertical acquisitions, horizontal acquisitions, conglomerate acquisitions, and we have a set of regulators that are largely indifferent to the consolidation that occurs. And the reason is the analogy often used is, if you put a frog water and you quickly boil it, will jump out. But if you very slowly heat the frog won't know the difference, and you can kill it just by gradually turning the heat. And so what we have is a very gradual consolidation and complication of the industry, with each incremental change seeming like it's small and nobody looking at the total. You're talking to somebody who's been a vigorous opponent, a type of acquisition. There are people on the other side who believe that it is a trend that assists the economies of scale, that assists the career mobility, and that brings blood and innovation to the industry. Personally, I think those arguments are incorrect, and right now there is no point in sight, and there is no serious dialogue about whether we're doing the right thing. So back to you.
So what you are saying is that all of this consolidation which has taken place, which by the way is what we are expecting here in India, has it reduced consumer tariffs in any way or not?
That really is the perfect question to ask. I will tell you, and I think this is factual. There is absolutely no evidence at all that the consolidation of the industry has had any particular effect on cost, on quality, on anything like that. In fact, that is never the motivation for these acquisitions, and that is essentially the difference between the Holding Company Act and the present, because the Holding Company Act allowed acquisitions subject to a statutory standard which is very strict. In order to receive approval of an acquisition, the acquirer had to show that the result of the acquisition would be to quote, tend toward the economical and efficient development of an integrated public system, close quote. That was the standard by which tested the mergers and acquisitions. Today there is no standard whatsoever. And so you have the proponent for these acquisitions quite blunt. And they will say in their applications, we're doing this for strategic positioning. We're doing this to give ourselves a platform from which to expand. We're doing this so that we can get better access to capital. We no longer have credible arguments underlying these acquisitions that they're doing it for purposes of efficiency. Now, you're going to ask, why do regulators continue to approve them if the applications are unaccompanied by promises of cost effectiveness? And the answer is very simple. Let me use a blunt word. Bribes. B-R-I-B-E-X. Now, what I mean in this context are legal bribes, not illegal bribes. But you will find every one of these applications some very small breadcrumbs that are offered to the opponents. A company will make a charitable contribution. A company will say, we'll write $100 check to every customer once. A company will say, we'll be glad to invest invest in more renewable energy for a few years. The company might say, we'll be glad to locate our headquarters building in your area. The company might say, we'll be glad not to terminate workers for the next 2 years. In other words, what happens is regulators become attracted to very small short-term benefits, and they are blinded to the longer-term concern. And so there is no record anybody being actually better off these acquisitions. And frighteningly, nobody's studying the topic. So I'm glad that you asked that question. For what it's worth, I've just written an article I just published that I can send to you on the policies of our Federal Regulatory Commission on this very subject. And I'm slowly writing a book on the subject. Back to you.
Two last points, Scott. One is on electric vehicles being used as assets for storage of energy for two-way transmission of power to the utilities when the utility wants the power and the electric vehicle is going to be charged when the power costs drop, maybe in the middle of the night or whatever. And that's the first question. And if you allow me the second one, then I would like to ask you a separate question. And that is, do you see a U-turn where you opened up the markets for competition on the one hand, and then you find that you are going to re-regulate the open markets once again in the distant future?
I'm sorry. I did not hear that. Could you give me the second question again, please?
On competition, do you see the opening up of regulated sectors across the world to market-driven economies and utilities and policies going back to being again regulated once they spin out of control in the interest of the consumer in the long term. For example, AT&T, or you can take the example of Standard Oil at the turn of the last century.
I think I heard the question. If I heard the question, there are some states in the United States that have become distrustful of the movement toward competition, even though they supported it 20 years ago. And some of these states are doing what they now call re-regulation, reintegration, and removing competition and allowing their utilities to become monopolies over the generation sector. Again, these are states that have become uncomfortable with the pricing that they're seeing in wholesale markets. I need to step back and explain something. I mentioned something before about some states want to start a system. They want to keep their costs low and lean on resources that come from other states. And the problem is that in the wholesale market, these states then have to pay high prices because they've created their own shortages. So these states which themselves behaved in a way that is their own prices high, have decided to solve the problem by eliminating competition and returning monopoly. I don't know if that's what you were saying, but we're definitely seeing that trend. I believe it's an error. I believe they should have taken the medicine of competition in the early years, learned how to solve their resource problem by admitting more players to the market. But I'm not sure that was your question. And I didn't hear the first one very well.
The first one was on electric vehicles, EVs, electric cars. Being electric cars. Did you get that?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
You got
A brief comment on electric cars and where you were going. I have seen that the utilities are very excited about electric vehicles because they can sell more product. What I've found disturbing about it is that we haven't had careful discussion about the market structure for electric vehicles. When you think about it, there's the electric current that has to be sold. There's the electric charging stations. There's the planning deciding where the stations should go, and then there's the cars themselves. And my preference would be that we carefully decide what should the market structure be for electric vehicle charging stations. We shouldn't just hand that job over to the utilities. We should be having competition for the right to provide those stations. And I do see in the early years a natural monopoly over the function of planning for those electric charging stations. We have to decide how many downtown, how many in the suburbs, how many in the rural areas, what are the traffic patterns that will determine where these things should go. We don't want to underbuild charging stations. So I see the idea of a natural monopoly over the planning function. Then I like the idea of using competition for the opportunity to provide those charging stations. I'm disturbed when we simply hand that new job over to the utilities themselves. Back to you.
One last question. Electric vehicle in the American context. Is it a generating station? Is it a transmission asset? Is it a consumer or something else?
I'm sorry. One more time, please.
The electric vehicle. Is it a generating station? Is it a generator, a transmission asset, or a consumer? Because it also has the ability to re-plug into the grid whenever the requires power, since it is a storage device as far as the regulator and the electric utility is concerned.
Yes, I think I heard that. What was the very first word that you were referring to?
What is the description of an electric vehicle? Is it a generator, transmission asset, or a consumer, or something from the moon?
Yes. You know, I don't want my answer to be flipped. My question is, why does it matter? I often find that people try to fit. We have that saying, fitting a square peg into a round hole. And I often find that people try new technology into old statute and try to ask is this a generator, a transmission distribution system? Why not the question? Is this particular device going to be a cost-effective addition to the system? It is going to display something that's higher cost. Will total cost come down if we introduce it? And if the answer is yes, modified statutes to accommodate it, rather than try to put some old line word in the sentence that is define that service. So I hope that helps.
Well, sort of it does. Just to clarify, the reason why I asked that question is that the regulatory commissions here are still not able to clarify to themselves as to how to define this particular aspect of the system, because transportation is now being considered as a part of the electricity grid, and there are all kinds of taxes and rates that are chargeable depending on what you are, generator, transmission, etc.
Yeah. I think that's a very important point that technology is often held back by historic statutes that need to be amended. Now the question can often be where does the change occur legally? Does it occur in your parliament, in your Congress, or in your regulator? And so there has to be I've found more cooperation between the policymaking branch, the and the legislating branch, the Congress, in order to clarify these things. Back to you.
So finally, how do you define using the word define an electric vehicle in the utility system of things? Is it storage, generation, or something else?
Yeah, I'm just having trouble with the word. Could you spell it? I'm just not hearing the word. Reku.
Is it the electric vehicle considered a storage device, or is it considered as a part of the electric ecosystem in some other manner?
Yeah, I'm hearing the whole question except for the first word.
EV, electric vehicle. Tesla.
I'm sorry, electric vehicle. Okay, electric vehicle. Well, can I not answer the question by saying all three? It accommodates. It is electric vehicle. It acts as storage. But when it emits its output into the network, it acts as generation. When it takes power from the network, it acts as a consumer. I would have to say that it does fit nicely at all times into any one category, but it definitely acts as an asset that can assist the flow and the matching of demand and supply. So for me, I would spend a lot of time trying to figure out which category it falls into. I would create a new category and make sure we accommodated it. I can now understand the frustration. It's like when they call me and ask me, am I a liberal, a conservative, or a moderate? And I say I'm all three.
Okay, so that's great. So can we call it a UFO?
I beg your pardon?
A UFO?
Sorry.
UFO.
No, I'm not a UFO.
No. Electric vehicle, for God's sake, not you. I'm talking about the EV being a UFO.
The EV being a what?
A UFO?
A UFO.
Yeah.
I wouldn't think so.
Okay. Done. Thank you. Okay. Anything else? Anyone has a question? Any regulators? Scott, we need to see you face to face. It's such a pleasure to hear your voice, to see you. And I just want to ask you one last question. How do you maintain to look so young when you have such complicated ideas in your head? And there's a cat behind you.
I learned from people like you, and I appreciate very much this opportunity. And congratulations again on having such a fine organization.
Thank you, Scott. God bless. Thank you very much. Pleasure.
Goodbye.
Bye. Round of applause for you, Scott. Maruf, you're cutting into evening time. Now, you have any questions for your session? I know. Housekeeping wants to make an announcement. Housekeeping.
It's been a very long day today. So tonight we have a musical night with Miss Nidhi Kerur. So the program will start at 8 p.m. sit out area. We had the last night session. So please join us for tonight's musical night, please.
Guys, now it's time to relax. Enough of power, electrical and cyber security. But let's just chill. Okay. So let's have a nice roll in at 8, 5, 8, 10. Don't worry. Chill. Thank you, and a round of applause to all of you.